morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is week 8 of the Introduction to Culture Studies, and today I'd like to talk with you about family, love and marriage. These are all very big words, and most people usually believe that these concepts and the understanding of these big concepts are shared by everybody around the world, regardless of their culture. What I would like to show you today is that not necessarily everybody means the same by family, marriage or love. The understanding of these concepts depends on the culture, and it also changes diachronically and synchronically. So in different places in the world right now, and in different historical realities as well. So let us start with underlining the importance of the domestic sphere for human life, for culture. Of course, the domestic sphere could mean different levels of technology, different levels of comfort. It all depends on the historical moment, it all depends on the geographical location and very many other factors such as the wealth of the people involved and the climate or such things. But anyway, the domestic sphere is a very important issue because home, the dwelling space, shelter, becomes the place where very many cultural activities happen. And basically, it is the center of human life. What happens in the domestic sphere? Sleeping and relaxation, preparation and consumption of food, hygienic and grooming activities, upbringing and teaching of children, and also sexual activity usually happens within the domestic sphere. Speaking of love and marriage, of course, these subjects are related to human sexuality, which is a natural phenomenon, but as very many natural phenomena, as you can hopefully see by now, it has immense amount of cultural variation and different cultural representations and the attitudes of culture towards this phenomenon. So human sexuality serves different functions, biological and cultural. It serves the function of biological reproduction, but also physical pleasure, emotional acceptance and reassurance, and bond formation between people. Humans, as some anthropologists have established, are the sexiest species on Earth. What do I mean by that? Unlike other animals, humans do not have breeding season. They are not restricted, let's say, to 1 month or a couple of weeks when they are interested in sexual activity. They are basically interested in it most of the time. There is a lot of psychological preoccupation with sex-related issues in humans in general. You may recall from last week, there are some people who are asexual, so they lack this preoccupation, but for the vast majority, this is quite present in their lives. And as culture and history progressed, there has been increasing separation of hedonistic and reproductive aspects of sex. Through different cultural phenomena, some of them positive, some of them negative, we do not really need to go into the moral aspects of that, but things like contraception, even pornography, have resulted in the increased separation between hedonistic, that is the pleasure inducing, and reproductive, that is making children, aspects of sexuality. Let us now talk about different forms of marriage. So here we have a glossary of words related to marriage. Words like, for example, endogamy and exogamy. Endogamy means marrying within one's group, whatever is understood by one's group. It could be the ethnic group, a nation, a religion, even a local community, or even extended family. If you marry within one's group, this is endogamy. If you marry outside the group, it is exogamy. So the choice of spouse is important here. Now the number of people included in the marriage. So monogamy means one spouse exclusively and for life. But there are other possibilities in different cultures. For example, serial monogamy, which means one spouse at a time, but remarriage after death or divorce is allowed. This is something that happens in most Western culture. Marriage consists of two people, but they may separate and then you can marry someone else. Polygamy and polygamy means many spouses at the same time, and there are two kinds of polygamy basically. Polygyny means one husband, many wives, and polyandry, which means one wife, many husbands. Polyandry is significantly less frequent than polygyny, but anyway, they happened in human cultures. A specific form of marriage which is illegal in most countries is, for example, child marriage, when one or more spouses are children. These marriages are usually arranged by families, not by the children themselves, and children in many legal systems, especially in the Western world, are seen as victims in such situation. Here is a page of illustrations to show you how many different things can be understood by marriage. This is not a complete list or complete choice of images, but we could observe here religious ceremonies in different religions. Most religions have some form of celebration of marriage. We have an image of what looks like one man and four wives. Some cultures, like in some Muslim countries and historically in Mormon communities, polygyny was allowed and even encouraged. The last image here shows two men with the notes "just married," so it refers to same-sex marriage, which is again practiced in some cultures but illegal in some other cultures. You probably could come up with more examples of different wedding ceremonies and different cultural variations of the forms of marriage, but let us ask ourselves a general question: why do people marry? Well, as Bronisław Malinowski said, marriage is the licensing of parenthood. So for him, the most important aspect that makes people marry is to have legitimate offspring, which in most cultures is a very favorable thing in terms of inheritance. Some cultures have the patrilineal inheritance, that is from the side of the father. Some cultures have matrilinearity, so the mother's side is more favored, but legitimate offspring is one of the reasons why people marry still. Again, this list is not exhaustive. You could probably come up with more ideas, but some of the others are relationship between two or more, as you can see, people. So marrying for companionship, for romantic love. But then again, in many places, especially in the Western world, cohabitation serves the same purpose. So if you want to live with somebody, if you love them and want to establish a household with them, you can do it without actually going through the marriage ceremony. But for many people, this is an important symbol of their commitment and relationship. The next thing is moral sexual relations. Moral is in inverted commas because, of course, morality is very culture dependent, and in this case, referring to marriage, it usually means some sort of religious morality. So marriage would protect against fornication, that is premarital sex, and adultery, which means extramarital sex. So it is important for people following certain religions. So most forms of Christianity have it, but not only, other religions as well. Marriage is important for establishing networks of kinspeople, for security, for trade relations. So you do not marry one person, you are accepted into this person's family, and so your network of social contacts and family related contacts increases. We mentioned the legitimate offspring already, but for example, legal and financial reasons. People marry because they want to buy property together, they want to do the taxes together, they want to have better access to medical information or inheritance, and marriage, especially civil marriage, guarantees that. Also, in many cultures, marriage involved money, so the compensation for the family, and it could be done in two ways, either in the form of a dowry, that is when the wife brings the money into the family of her husband, or the bride price, so the family of the husband has to pay the money to the family of the bride in compensation for, let's say, accepting the woman into their group. So as you can see, there are lots of cultural variations, there are lots of ways that different cultures geographically and historically treat the subject of marriage. Let us now look at some opinions of anthropologists, and we go back to the 19th century again, to the beginning of anthropology and the study of human culture. So the first very important hypothesis was proposed by a Swiss anthropologist in the middle of the 19th century. His name was Johann Jakob Bachhofen, and he wrote a very influential book called Mother Right, or in original Das Mutterrecht. he believed that the original form of social behavior, referring to family life, was matriarchy. Matriarchy, this is the power of the mother, so the mother right, as he called it. He believed that the first communities of people, the tribal, nomadic society was communistic. It doesn't mean they were communist, it means they lived together forming a commune. So there was no clear position of leadership. And they were polyamorous. It means they were not exclusive in their relationships and also sexual relations. Then with the development of agriculture, people started to be more concerned with motherhood. They kind of understood the importance of the figure of the mother. This is connected to the beginning of the mystery cults that are very, very popular at this stage of the development of human society. Here we have a prehistoric image of a so-called Venus, or rather a mother goddess from the megalithic period. Bachofen basically called these phases or related these phases to the archetypes taken from Greek mythology. So the first polyamorous and communistic society would be connected to the goddess Aphrodite, the goddess of love and sensuality. Then the agricultural phase with mystery cults would be connected to goddess Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and motherhood. And then gradually, according to Bachofen, culture becomes masculinized. So matriarchy is replaced by patriarchy, that is the rule of the father. So the male archetypes embodied by gods Dionysus and later Apollo replace the dominance of the female archetypes. We will talk about ancient Greek religion and religious archetypes later on. This is just to indicate. This theory inspired very many later scholars, intellectuals, even politicians. So people like Lewis Henry Morgan and Frederick Engels, we'll talk about him in a moment, Joseph Campbell, and also feminists in the 1970s, the second wave feminists. They believed that Bachofen was right and that matriarchy was the original state of human society, which they wanted to return to. It's still contested. It's not really fully corroborated by archaeology, so it's still an open question whether the first nomadic societies were actually polyamorous or matriarchal. Then we have Frederick Engels in the next generation, so late 19th century. He was a German philosopher and industrialist living in England, and also he's probably most remembered as the best friend and frequent collaborator of Karl Marx, one of the most important philosophers and intellectuals who influenced a lot about the 20th century, although he wrote in the 19th. So Frederick Engels conducted some research on his own. This is the 19th century. They didn't go anywhere. They went to the library and read books and thought. And this is how these theories started. But some of these ideas were still popular, and they were smart enough to be discussed much later. So the idea that Frederick Engels proposed in his book from 1884 called On the Origins of Family, Private Property and the State was to look at family life from the perspective of economy. So family economics, production, distribution, division of labor. Who works, who benefits from other people's work? Is it connected to the gender roles? And what Engels believed was that the first form of family was the matrilineal clan, something that he took from Beethoven. So people worked together in this kind of original commune. They raised children together. It didn't really matter who gave birth to those children because they were cared for by an entire community. Then people started understanding the idea that incest, so sexual relations between close family members, people who were connected by blood, like brothers and sisters or parents and children, was wrong, mostly because eventually it could lead to the illnesses of children or weakness of children being born. So the incest taboo was introduced. So the polygamy was still practiced, but female fidelity became very important, and the concept of legitimacy of children believed. So a man could have many women, but each woman only had to have one man. This led to man's economic advantage and, in effect, to the introduction of patriarchy. This is how Engels understood this shift from the original matriarchy to the role of the father and, by extension, the male dominance in society. Again, these are theories that have been contested, but they tell something, I guess, correct about the history of human societies, and it's important to know them even if you do not really agree with them. The study of the family, especially from the historical perspective, really starts after the Second World War, and it becomes a kind of discipline of history and anthropology, and one of the most important scholars dealing with the history of the family, especially in Britain, was Lawrence Stone, and his most important book is called The Family, Sex and Marriage in England between 1500 and 1800. This book was written in the 1970s, and it talks about the history of the modern family. So basically the dominant forms of family arrangements and different approaches to the family study. So we have, for example, the demographic approach, using demographic facts from church registers and censuses. The first censuses start in the 18th century, so the documents collecting data on births, marriages and deaths. Also later on more specific data about the structure of households and other such things. For much longer these things were written down in church registers, so the baptisms, the wedding ceremonies and the burials. The approach that Stone favored, however, was the so-called sentiments approach, which used a lot of cultural material, also literary material, as historical evidence. So things like letters, diaries, material objects such as houseplants, clothes, utensils, toys, works of art like portraits or sculptures, or, as I said, the works of literary fiction, especially in the realist style. This provided a lot of material, and it's still very interesting to do, especially from the literature and culture studies today. But there were potential problems with that, like the sources are often subjective and not reliable. Literature could be just a product of fantasy. Diaries could be exaggerated. And most materials concern the richest sections of the society. Most of the material culture belonging to poorer people did not survive. And if we look at portraits, of course, only rich people could afford it. So let's look at these changing historical concepts of family life. Thank you. Hello.